Mike. Hello, hello, good morning, good morning. I'm Marcel Ames. I am the owner and designer of Ten of Pentacles, or X of Pentacles, as some people know it. And today I want to talk a little bit about dreams. That's a dream, right? And just by show of hands, who here had a dream last night? Pretty much everyone, right? Maybe you don't remember it. If you're waiting for your coffee to kick in, maybe you're dreaming right now, and that's okay too. And so let's say you're in a dream and you're flying through these clouds and you land on top of a pyramid maybe, and there's a blue hippo that's flying by and you're eating cotton candy, right? In a normal dream state, that's normal. That's as normal as getting up and brushing your teeth and having your coffee. But how many of you have heard of a lucid dream state before? All right, so a few people, you've heard of lucid dreaming. And so in a lucid dream, all of a sudden you're like, why the hell am I standing on a pyramid? And what is this hippo doing here? Wait, hippos don't fly. This is bizarre. Oh shit, I'm dreaming, right? You're aware. And so like the dream world, life is dualistic in nature, right? We have these dualities in life, hot and cold, masculine and feminine energy. Negative and positive, active and passive. And sometimes they're risks, and sometimes they're rewards, and the actions that we take in life. And I'm not a big risk taker, never have been. You won't catch me at a casino or skydiving anytime soon. It's just not my MO, right? And around this time 5 years ago, I was working as a mental health counselor, and the caseload was kind of getting low. Didn't really have a lot going on, and so contrary to popular belief, as a millennial, we don't pop out of the womb to create a unicorn startup, right? We don't all do that. And so I place value on security, on stability, on financial stability. I wanted routine. I wanted something that was going to last. And so my dad came to me one day and said, hey, Marcel, I know this place that's hiring, 401k package, benefits, the whole nine, salaried. I think you need to go apply. And I was a little apprehensive. Eventually I applied and went through this extensive interview process. And in the summer of 2014, I started my new job with the Richmond Police Department. And I remember one thing that stood out was our first day of the academy was actually at headquarters. And we're with HR, and we're going over kind of all of the typical paperwork, so going through our benefits packages, and the head of HR is passing out papers, and she hands a paper down to our row and passes it down and goes, this is your life insurance policy, which, okay, fine, life insurance policy, and kind of casually says, so there's a box down below, this is your life insurance policy. If you're killed in the line of duty, who do you want to be a beneficiary? Fill out the name, pass it back. And I kind of paused for a moment. Damn, I could get killed on duty as a cop, right? That's kind of a risk. But by then I'd already gone through this process and I was committed, and there were 29 of us, actually 30 of us at the time. And so I said, what the hell? It's a steady job, like I'm gonna give it a shot. And the academy starts, turned my world upside down. Had no idea what I was getting into. It's a paramilitary environment, so you're pretty much like going to boot camp. You get hazed, but it's just kind of something you accept, in that, we're gonna be cops, you have to have tough skin, and so you just kind of suck it up and move on. And you move through phases. So this was the Pond-Scum Phase, we called it, where you're in these nasty green shirts, and eventually, you kind of earn your stripes, so to speak, and work your way up to the blue phase, where the real, actual police work happens. And so, it was tough. There were 29 of us. We bonded. It was, eventually I learned to love it. You love the pain. And everything's going great. We get into the fall. We're in the blue phase. We're doing this actual police training, so the firearms and all that good stuff. And then something happens. So I'll pull the quote here from Hamlet. Everyone's familiar with it. And one line, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, really stood out to me, right? Which outrageous fortune kind of being fate, and fate sort of drawing this arrow from its quiver, and November 13, 2014, I happened to be in its crosshairs. And going back to these active and passive dreams, sometimes we make things happen in life, and sometimes life happens to us. And so life happened to me. And I end up with a concussion during training that goes untreated for 3 months because treatment was withheld from me. Because when you're with the city, you have to deal with workers' comp. And so it's not necessarily about getting you back on your feet. Sometimes it's about numbers. And so treatment is withheld. Eventually, I'm pretty much a walking zombie. So I'm on 10, 12 different medications, treating everything from insomnia to suicidal ideation to panic attacks as symptoms of this concussion and the damage that was done. Eventually, I'm able to see specialists, and I go through months of seeing a psychologist and seeing a physical therapist and going to this concussion rehab center to get myself back on track. And eventually I do. I get back to where I can go back to the police department and work part-time with restrictions, which was somewhere in the spring of 2015. And so I go back, but by then my class has graduated. And I'm sort of stuck in this cop limbo now where they're like, we don't know what to do with you. You know, you still have restrictions. Go to headquarters and make IDs, right? So you go from firearms training to now making IDs in the back room of headquarters. And you're seeing all your classmates that you bled and sweat with, they have their badges and they're out on the street. And it sucks. And it becomes a routine. You know, you wake up and go into headquarters, print IDs until you get a migraine and go home. And it went on for quite some time. And fast forward to summer of 2014, I go to work, it's a normal routine, print IDs, get a headache, go home. And I get home, and my dad would, typically work from home sometimes, and he had a small business that he was running, so we would kind of do our own thing in the house. And I get home, call upstairs for him, no answer. And I walk upstairs, and when I get to the top of the stairs, his body's on the ground, unresponsive. So I jump down, and I'm doing chest compressions, and the paramedics show up, and no one does anything. And I'm looking at them like they're nuts, like, why aren't you helping me? He was dead, and had probably died not too long after I'd gone to work that morning from heart failure. My parents were divorced at the time, so my mom was traveling, working between like Seattle and DC. My younger brother Alexander was a few days away from moving to Brooklyn, and my younger sister was in Norfolk. So I was the remaining heir that was available, so to speak, and became responsible for his estate. And he had no will, no life insurance, and not a lot in his checking account, which was a little surprising. So a lot of loose ends to tie up while you're still recovering from a concussion. I get a call from my mom one day who was helping me with the estate, and she tells me that she'd just spoken to the mortgage company. Surprised, the house was in foreclosure and had been for quite some time, and he never told anyone. So now that he is dead, they're expediting the process, and I have until the end of October to clear this entire house out, clean it up, and vacate the premises so they can list it. Now I'm homeless, or at least temporarily. So this is my storage bin. I pretty much grabbed everything I could, shoved it into my car, shoved the rest into a storage bin. The closest relative I had was my sister down in Norfolk, so I went down there for a little bit, but workers' comp in the city, I couldn't leave. And I still had my father's estate to deal with and all these loose ends in Richmond that had to be dealt with. And so my girlfriend, Ashley, ended up having a spare bedroom and just said, you know what, come back, live with me, stay here, get yourself together, deal with your dad's estate and figure everything out. And so here I am at our house. I've lost what feels like my career. I've lost my dad. I've lost my home, and for quite some time, I felt like I lost my mind. And what is the one thing that has brought us all here today? Is what? Creativity, right? Creativity. So what do you do when you have everything snatched from you in a matter of months? You find an outlet, right? I never had time to process my father's death. I never really had time to process what was going on with my mind because through the course of dealing with the estate and everything else, I ended up relapsing, and so I'm dealing with all these symptoms, and so I started sketching at the kitchen table as a creative outlet. Nothing gallery worthy by any means, but it helped channel and funnel some of that frustration and fear and all of these crazy emotions into something. I needed an outlet, and this was my outlet. Eventually, my doctors tell me that, pretty much you can't go back and be a cop. You have too many cognitive deficits. You'll never pass the test again. Find a new job, right? And so in summer of 2016, I end up starting Ten of Pentacles, or X of Pentacles. And I started the LLC, but I was still tied to the city. I was still dealing with workers' comp. I didn't really know if I wanted to start my own company, right? And it was crazy to think that I was more fearful of failing at doing something I love than being killed on the street as a cop. Let that sink in, right? But I do it anyway. And I started out, I said, hey, maybe I'll try to be a designer because I've always loved menswear. I've always been an enthusiast, and it's actually an obsession. But I never wanted to pursue it as a career. So now I'm like, well, if I can't go back and be a cop, what can I do? And it took a lot of convincing. And I sent letters to people to see if, maybe I could become an assistant designer. But no one had anything for me. And a lot of great advice, but no job. So I ended up starting this company. And time goes on, and I teach myself graphic design, and I teach myself how to sew. And I'm learning all these new things. Basically, I would do it until I get a migraine, and then I was out for a couple of days. And so this went on for a while. And eventually, by December of 2016, those drawings from the kitchen table end up becoming my first collection. And it's a great feeling. And just to be able to create and produce things, even if you're doing it for yourself, is a very fulfilling experience, right? We create these things, we have these concepts, these ideas. To take it from concept to physical thing is a great feeling. But this wasn't just a personal project, this was a business, right? Eventually, I want this to be a source of income. And so that means you have to sell it. And I'm kind of an introvert. So I want to sit behind my computer and draw pretty things and make collections and make concepts. But I think that, you set up an online store and automatically people start buying stuff, and that's how it works. That's not how it works. And just because you share it on Facebook doesn't mean people will buy it. And so pretty much when I released these, I couldn't give them away, right? I'm sharing them, I'm making discount codes, nobody's buying anything, fine. And so at that point, self-doubt sinks in. And I start thinking that, okay, I suck, and these things probably suck. And even though I know they're superb quality and come from the best fabric mills, and I'm using all the best materials, and it's everything that all of these greater brands that have a following, it's the same thing they're doing, maybe I just suck. Maybe no one respects me. Maybe no one cares. I'm just a small fry. I'm funding this by myself. I don't have investors. I'm not good enough. My peers aren't going to respect me. The guys at P2 Uomo, which is the biggest menswear trade show in the world, they don't respect me. You start going and having these thoughts of self-doubt. But I kept pushing through anyway. And I continued to teach myself more and learn more and continue to establish connections with people and sent emails out, and a lot of them got ignored, and I got rejected a lot. And finally, when I reached the point where I was like, you know what, maybe I'll go like, I don't know, go back to mental health or something like this. I don't know if this is panning out and nobody's responding to me. Well, things don't happen instantaneously. And then I had this book, right? I had this book that we'll call it my dream book, where I wrote down all of these things that I wanted to happen. As a designer, I put collections in there. I put magazines. So I think I said like, you know, I'm going to be in GQ. I'm going to be in Richmond Magazine. I'm going to be in Virginia Living. I'm going to be in Esquire, and I'm going to work for Ledbury, and I'm going to work for maybe Sid Mashburn down in Atlanta. And I put all these things in this book, these things that I wanted to accomplish that were dreams of mine. And they were more so focused on maybe me working for someone else, not necessarily working for myself, but I put them in anyway. And time moves on, and this happens. Now I'm in Ledbury, right? Awesome feeling. Ledbury's like, everyone knows Ledbury, they're a hero, and I've followed them for quite some time. And so this was like a monumental moment for me. Like, someone believes in me. Someone believes in me and my product enough to have me in their store, right? It was an awesome feeling, but there was still some self-doubt. And then this happens. Now I'm in Virginia Living. I get my first article written about me. And that's another great feeling. And so I started to push myself a little more, but I'm still under surveillance. I'm still being watched by workers' comp. And so I'm still hanging on to the city. And I have a closet full of suits. I now have my own products, but I'm wearing the same fatigues that I wore in the academy every single day, and the same patrol boots that were a part of our uniform every single day. And I have my handcuff key on my keys every single day, and my ID badge from the academy every single day. And when I would meet people, they asked me, well, what do you do? What do you do for a living? I'm a recruit for the Richmond Police Academy. I'm in Ledbury. I'm a recruit for the City of Richmond Police Academy. That was my response. I was still hanging on to this idea as if I were going back, although my doctors told me I would never go back. I knew I was never going back. A few months later, my mom comes back. So I have my mom back. After that, my little brother comes back. So my brother moves back to Richmond. I have this extra support system. My family's back in town. And by November of 2017, I severed my ties with the city of Richmond and the police department. I'm done. No more workers' comp, done. And it feels like a weight has been lifted off of my shoulders. And I feel like I can finally commit to this, right? There's no pressure. This shit has to work. And what do? You start to build relationships, and I start to send emails, and I let the rejection roll off of me. And I put myself out there more, because we can't always sit behind and hide behind the creativity, hide behind the computer. You have to put yourself out there. And then this happens. I'm in Richmond Magazine, and it's a wonderful feeling. And now I'm finally starting to believe in myself and feel like this can really happen. This is going to work. Now people locally maybe they'll take me seriously. I'm in Richmond Magazine, and it's a great feeling. And so by this time, my little brother was home, as I told you before, who also happens to be a phenomenal photographer. That was his passion. And he gets back. I'm all the way into this, so we start pumping out editorial content. So now we're pumping out editorial content to accompany these collections that are coming out. And sometimes, some people didn't get it at first, but eventually, like, everyone warmed up to it, and we didn't really, we were still kind of figuring things out, and it got better and better. So now we're pumping out editorials, fashion editorials, to coincide with these collections, because, I'm not just doing this from home anymore. Like, I'm trying to compete with like Hermes or Drake's or some of these bigger brands. So I have to take this seriously, and I'm juggling a lot of hats. But I'm finally committed to it. And now when people ask me what I do, I'm a designer. I'm the owner of Ten of Pentacles, a luxury brand and design house here in Richmond. And I said I'm a designer, owner of Ten of Pentacles, luxury brand and design house here in Richmond. And I'm committed to my brand. And it feels good, and I'm building relationships, and I'm understanding the importance of connections with actual humans, not just a transactional email, so to speak, and that you really have to take a risk in putting yourself out there. And in summer of 2018, so very recently, this happened. And I'm in GQ. How surreal is that? Right? 2 years in. And so, yes, I was very ambitious in the things I wrote in these books, but eventually they came true. It just took a hell of a lot of pushing, and a hell of a lot of commitment, and a hell of a lot of talking myself out of, and others talking me out of self-doubt. Then next came the Scout Guide. And then finally, Plaza Uomo, which is a big menswear magazine based out of Sweden, publishes a huge article on me. My brother's work is published in it as well. And they debut the international edition at no other than Pitti Uomo. Now my peers respect me. And it's a great feeling. And so that brings you up to speed. What a ride. So, with all of that said, here we are in January. We're still in the land of New Year's resolutions, and sometimes a lot of those resolutions never get resolved. And as creatives, we have concepts, and we have dreams, and we have all of these great things that we like to conceptualize, but sometimes there's something holding us back, and maybe we need to let go. We're all going to experience something surreal in our lives at some point, whether it be on the negative side or whether it be on the positive side. And we can't always change the what that happens, but maybe we can change how things happen or after they happen, right? Our actions determine the surreal that we experience next. And so it's awesome to be a dreamer, but sometimes we have to be lucid dreamers. And it's awesome to have these dreams and concepts, but maybe, just maybe, if it's good enough to dream about, maybe it's good enough to commit to paper. And maybe if something is good enough to commit to paper, hell, maybe it's good enough to commit to reality. And so that's something I'd like everyone to kind of think about as we move forward at the top of 2019. Not just being dreamers, but being lucid dreamers. I want to thank Jalinda and Michelle and Lindsay and the Creative Morning team for allowing me this extraordinary platform to come and tell my story. Everyone who's helped me along the way, and all of you guys for carving time out of your mornings to come join us for Creative Mornings Surreal this January. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my God,
Thank
I feel
you.
so inspired.
Thank you so much.
So inspiring.
All right, we have a good amount of time for some questions. So who would love to ask Marcel something? Any questions? Yes.
Do I patterns? So the jacket that is outside of the door is my pattern. So I drew, so to answer your question, I guess in short, yes. It's a little bit of both. So the jacket that's outside of the door is an outerwear prototype that I developed. And I drew that pattern up from scratch and created the jacket. When I first started, I actually had ties as well. And so a lot of the ties, I created my own pattern for the neckties and was sewing my own neckties on the kitchen table. So if you go through my social media and scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see those ties. So yes, I do all my own patterns, but as well as all the designs, so everything that's on the scarves are my own. Those are all my sketches. Most people, when they get items produced or have ties made in stores and selling ties, they have what are called archives. And you go to these archives and they have archives full of paisleys and dots and regimental stripes and block stripes and all these different things that kind of get recycled, and I wanted to stand out. but I love tradition. So I wanted things to be made in a traditional way, but I wanted to have my own thing because I want to stand out. And so I started creating my own patterns. But the suits, for example, are not, I didn't make the suit by hand or develop the pattern. That was developed for me. Any book recommendations? I have to think about that one. So I feel like I read more like self-help books along the way. The Art and Practice of Creative Visualization is a good one for creatives. It's kind of a weird old school occult book, but it was, and you'll recognize the symbols as you go through it, but that really helped me with conceptualizing and creating things and being committed, the Celestine Prophecy. I'm running blanks. For a while, I didn't read. It was like hard for me to go through and read things. Let me think about that one and I'll get back to it. The Celestine Prophecy and the Art of Creative Visualization. Art and Practice of Creative Visualization.
So you mentioned that you were in the mental health profession.
Yes, ma'am.
What made you decide on that career?
My dad did it. My dad did it. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So she asked, I was previously in the mental health profession, what made me do that? What made me decide to do that? My dad was doing it. My dad had done it for 25, 30 years. It was familiar to me. Prior to that, like I worked in sales, I worked as an actor, and from watching him do it, I ended up learning and getting a certification, and I ended up in it. And a lot of it was based on client referrals, and he had those relationships that were already established. And so I guess it was kind of like a safe choice, though, when you think about some of the caseloads and a lot of the things I encountered, it wasn't exactly safe, but it was still fulfilling. It just wasn't consistent, and there was a whole lot of paperwork. A lot of paperwork, more paperwork than the actual treatment process and the rehabilitation process and helping people. It was probably spent more time writing the case notes to reflect the work that was done, which is a little crazy to me, but that's how. Yes.
Carl, so how do the symptoms of your concussion impact?
How do the symptoms impact? So at this point, I am pretty much able to cope with the symptoms and kind of take precautionary steps to avoid things like the migraines, but insomnia is something I struggle with a lot, and pretty much how I sleep the night before determines my workflow the next day. So if I don't sleep, it can be as bad as me not being able to do basic math the next day, right? It might take me like 5 minutes to figure out a tip on a receipt because I'm just not firing off in my brain. So it doesn't impact me as much now, and in the beginning, like when I did those collections, for example, I was learning graphic design, and so I would learn something one week, and if I weren't consistent with it, by the beginning of next week, I'd forgotten everything I'd done. So there's still some things that I've done in that collection, I can't tell you how I did them, I don't remember. My short-term memory just wasn't what it used to be, which is unfortunate, but I had to stay consistent in a lot of my workflow because I would forget it. It was great when I go and maybe watch Netflix when I could watch TV because I could watch a whole show and then forgot I'd watched it. So I watched a lot of things over and over, but in terms of my workflow, that was kind of the impact it had on me. No longer is this just a learning curve like it would be for the average person. It's a learning curve with these post-concussive symptoms. So that was a big one for me, was the short-term memory loss and really slowing down the workflow and the production process. I felt crazy for a while. I saw one go up and then there's one up there. Okay.
So you're
Yes.
You basically lost your job and you moved in with your girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
How did you keep your confidence in your dreams when you kind of lost your independence?
She was a huge, like, you know, if it weren't for Ashley, this wouldn't have happened. Like, you know, I was almost numb at that point. So, you know, how did I deal with losing my independence and losing everything? You're numb, you know? And it was harmful because I was in a very, very dark place and I was very jaded and I dealt with feelings of, you know, betrayal and sorrow and all these things. Again, this creative outlet and having a support system and having someone telling you, no, you are worth it. You are as good as you think. You just haven't had the exposure yet. And, you know, this is what you love. Give it a shot. Don't be scared to give it a shot. You know, having that support system and having this outlet. But another thing too was like, you know, validation. Eventually I started to see, you know, I'd follow like Pitti Uomo's. It comes out twice a year. When they had the event, and I start seeing designs that I've created at Pitti Uomo in Florence, Italy. And I was pissed at first, but eventually I'm like, oh, maybe I am doing something right. Like maybe this is working. So it was, you know, it was a lot of different things. It was having that support system, having that creative outlet, and it took a little validation, you know, a little external validation to really keep me going. But also, like, I didn't have anywhere to go. There was no going back to being a cop. There was no, you know, really going back to being a mental health counselor. I couldn't see myself doing anything else. And this was the one thing that, like, if I weren't getting paid, what would I still be thinking about on a daily basis? They made fun of me for this in the academy. Like, that was a running joke. Like, you know, Ames is Mr. GQ, you know? So this was an obsession. I was just scared to turn it into a career. So I think all of those things are what kind of kept me moving forward.
Did you ever struggle with committing to like one style with your work, like one project, and like what's helped you kind of like really just kind of go for that one thing that you
So do I ever struggle with committing to one style? Yes. Yeah. I'm all over the place. And my mom, you know, swears it was like some sort of like weird superpower I got like once. She was like, when did you start drawing? Honestly, it comes out in spurts. And so even sometimes I get asked like, well, what is your work day like? Or what is your work week like? You know, I don't have days I commit to design. Design just kind of commits itself. I can sit down and try to work on something or have these ideas or themes and concepts I come up with, but a lot of the times they don't come out when I force it. It's usually like 11:34 at night and I hop out of bed and I have to get this thing out. There isn't as much control over it as most people would think, at least not for me. But yes, that's why I have like 5 or 6 sketchbooks that I just go to and draw things out, and sort of the first one that comes out, if it feels right, a lot of it is sort of an instinctual feeling for me. If it feels right, the color palette is right, you know, it's cohesive with everything else I want to release, then, you know, that's when I commit to it. But yeah, it's still a scattered sort of process.
One more. My question was going to be, as an artist that was trying to break into a pretty swamped field, there's a lot of noise in men's fashion, there's a lot of perspectives. Where did you draw your inspiration from, and how did you stay true to that true north that got you the exposure that you got being a different country mark?
Okay, so how did I stay true to that vision and kind of breaking forth in the fashion industry or menswear industry that was kind of saturated? Things that inspired me, people who inspired me, a good mentor of mine, Domenico Spano, old school Italian guy I met when I used to work at Saks Fifth Avenue in New York, who I call my Uncle Mimo. Very wild character, but kind of had this classic American style and really taught me about elegance. And you know, he's very much one that kind of owns his own flaws, but owns kind of those beautiful things about him. So I was always inspired that, you know, he's this guy that immigrated from Italy and ended up, you know, at Saks Fifth Avenue, and he's selling his suits for $7,000, and it's such a lovable character, and people go there for the experience of Nemo, not just the clothing. He was one of those people. There are some people that I watched along the way, like Antonio Ciongoli with Eidos Napoli, who was creative director and was with Isaiah and ended up starting 18 East. He was a designer that I watched a lot. Agish Madan, there were a few others, but basically people that sort of still respected tradition and respected craftsmanship, but weren't scared to do something that was different. And so, you know, like I say with my brand, like, you know, we always respect tradition and respect craftsmanship. Like, I'm not in this business to just sell a suit. It isn't just about a look for me, right? It isn't, you know, some people are fulfilled by, hey, I'm dressed up and I'm in a suit. It's deeper than that. For me, there's a culture behind it. There are people that have been sewing since they were kids, and they'd have sewing contests in the back room to see who could finish a lapel first, you know, sewing canvas. And it's a deeper culture than that. And I wanted to stay true to that culture. It's not just about a look to me. Style is important, and, you know, looking great is important, but it's deeper. There are people that, you know, are stitching these pocket squares by hand. I could cut out a bed sheet and run it through a sewing machine, and fundamentally it serves the same purpose. But there's soul behind something that's done by hand. There's a culture behind that. There's imperfection in things that are done by hand or done by the human hand that the machine can't replicate, and there's beauty in imperfection. And in a world of fast fashion and everything is duplicated and everything comes out instantaneously, I wanted to highlight originality and I wanted to highlight tradition. And so those are kind of things that were truly in the back of my mind when I released this. I'm not just in it to be the, you know, the next big thing and you know, be about a look or be a novelty. That isn't what this is about. There's culture behind it. And I wanted to stay true to that culture and respect those people who came before me, those people who are now dying off, and there aren't a lot of people to carry that torch. I wanted to bring the humane aspects back to this, but put my own twist on it. Thank you.
So great, Marcel. Oh my God.
Thank you so much.
I'm gonna like kick your butt even more.
Please do.